The defense has criticized the state for portraying murder-accused Oscar Pistorius as a liar. In its closing argument, it questioned why the state failed to call several key witnesses who were among the first at the crime scene. Advocate Barry Roux has also asked the North Gauteng High Court not to ignore the fact that police tampered with evidence. He also accused the state of deliberately ignoring important evidence in the case. A judgment date is expected to be set today. Now, the defense says the state is desperate to nail Oscar Pistorius. It used a series of crime scene photos to demonstrate how it had been disturbed by police and pointed to several inconsistencies on how police claimed they handled crime scene evidence. Pistorius' vulnerability as a disabled person also came under the spotlight, with the defense claiming that the athlete had no choice but to face the perceived danger on the morning he shot and killed Reeva Steenkamp. It's also disputed the testimony of some of the state witnesses who testified hearing screams just moments before the gunshots. The defense maintains that the first shots were heard at 3:12 a.m., disputing the state's claim that the shooting happened at 3:17 a.m. It's also rejected claims that there was an argument between Pistorius and Steenkamp. Well, let's cross now to Griselda Lewis. She's at the North Gauteng High Court. Griselda, defense advocate Barry Roux questioning every point in the state's case and not letting go of that issue of shoddy police work either.
Oh, certainly, Natasha, this issue has come up several times in this trial. We saw Advocate Barry Roux focus on that quite extensively when he began his closing arguments this morning, saying that the court should not ignore the fact that the crime scene at Oscar Pistorius' home had been tampered with, that police had moved items from one place to the other, and basically used a series of photographs, as you've already said, to demonstrate this, and saying that he also lashed out at the state, saying that the state simply ignored the fact or did not want to acknowledge the fact that police did not handle the crime scene as they were supposed to. One of the other sticking points here for the defense is that they're saying that they're not making the submission that Oscar Pistorius did not arm himself, that he did not shoot through the door, but they're calling on the court or asking the court to take into account the circumstances that led to Oscar Pistorius pulling those 4 shots, or rather triggering, or rather shooting or pulling the trigger 4 times, saying that Oscar Pistorius was scared at the time, he was vulnerable, and that he had no option at the point. His disability also came under the spotlight, saying that his disability, him being disabled from a very early age, put Oscar Pistorius in a very vulnerable position, and it created an exaggerated fight response, in that someone in Oscar Pistorius' condition would instead go ahead and face the perceived danger instead of running away from it, because he did not have the option to do so given the fact that he did not have legs. We also saw defense advocate Barry Roux also zoom in just before the lunch break on issues relating to the neighbors that were called. You saw a lot that the state had called neighbors to testify that lived quite a distance away from Oscar Pistorius, even in the nearby estate or complexes. But basically what Barry Roux is saying, that the defense witnesses that he called live much closer to Oscar Pistorius. And what did they hear? They heard the sound of a male calling out for help coming from the direction of Oscar Pistorius' home. So what he says, this deals directly with the issue relating to them not calling witnesses basically to deal with the issue of whether Oscar Pistorius screams like a woman or a man. So certainly it's been a showdown again here inside court since this morning. We also heard some very strong words and strong criticism coming from defense advocate Barry Roux of his colleague, State Prosecutor Gerinel, where we had heard words, for example, like naughty and desperate. Those are some of the words that Barry Roux used to describe his colleague Gerinel.
All right, Griselda, and very briefly, the date for judgment expected to be announced today. What can you tell us?
Well, certainly, Natasha, that's what we were expecting this afternoon. You recall yesterday that Judge Thokozile Masipa was very stern in telling both parties that they needed to complete their closing arguments by today in the allocated time that had been set aside for these closing arguments. So what we were expecting straight after a defense advocate, Barry Rue, is done with his closing arguments, the state might then reply. That's expected to be very brief, and then Judge Thokozile Masipa will give a date on where we're expecting that judgment.
All right, Griselda, thank you very much. We've run out of time. That's Griselda Lewis live from Pretoria, bringing those updates from the closing arguments of the Oscar Pistorius